Um, Good morning, everybody. We have 43 people and counting. I'm just going to let a couple more people sign in and join us, and then we will kick off. But thank you all for giving up some time, joining us this morning for the next sort of 40 minutes or so. And we'll get started. So yeah, thank you for joining us, and good morning to you all. I hope you're well and healthy, and we find you in a comfortable place at home, wherever you may be. And welcome to the first in a series of virtual moments that we're going to be hosting throughout and beyond this current lockdown period. We've described them and this exposure series as sessions for the culturally curious, and our plan is to program a diverse range of talks and experiences featuring a guest from our network, covering kind of everything from business strategy and future trends to music, art, fashion, food, and a number of other subjects in between. So today, I'm delighted to have a really great friend and collaborator and partner of ours to join us, Tom Sadigar, whose agency Avansere, he will tell you a little bit about, but he is going to share some really fascinating ideas and insights about what we've learned over the last 6 weeks, which seemed to some of us, and certainly at times seems like an eternity, but we have learned such a great deal. I think it's going to be interesting to hear what Tom has to say about, what we've learned, what this may mean for us in the future, and how we might consider strategies for survival, adaptation, and evolution. Overriding all of this is our central theme of purpose and responsibility, and we think brands will need to place much bigger focus on sort of doing good and doing better in the new world order in 2020 and beyond. There will be time for some questions at the end, but you can also send questions through on the chat function on your Zoom. And there is a recording of this session that will be available for future reference should any of you wish to share this or even come back and listen again. So with that said, let's get started. I'll hand you over to Tom and place myself on mute. Morning, Tom.
Morning. Thank you very much, Raoul, and everyone at Exposure. Let me just get this up and then we'll get going. Okay. Yes, so thank you again. No, what an experience, and what a year to start a business like Avansere, which is designed to move people forwards through puzzling terrains, and what a puzzling terrain we definitely find ourselves in. Couple of caveats before we get into this. I think geographic differences and industry differences are all taken into consideration when in the next half an hour. So I think the nature of looking at the nature of this year and 2021, I think a lot of the dynamics that we're going to talk about and the ways of coming back and growing obviously have to be in consideration of everyone's particular circumstance. So I just wanted to say that as well. This is the question that I think Raoul and I were keen to ask all of us, whether you are running a company, a multinational corporation, or a freelancer trying to find your way through the change that's happening. The nature of change is pretty potent at the moment, and quite an intense experience, I think, for all of us personally and professionally. And in a time of regeneration, how will business survive and thrive with purpose, whether it is a sort of a 20,000 person workforce or an individual? And this word regeneration is something that's very close to my heart. Having read a little bit about regenerative business in the last couple of months, now seems to be a perfect time to, I guess, ask this question and to really think about how we sustain responses to this question post-pandemic. From Capital Institute, some of you might be familiar with this dynamic. We are clearly in a period whereby sustainability is becoming a norm. It's becoming an understood term, often misused, but I think people are beginning to adopt it into their daily lives. So we've moved beyond notions of green to notions of sustainable. But is that enough? And I think there's a lot of conversations within the media at the moment about the nature of sustainability and what exactly are we trying to sustain during and post-pandemic. So I prefer to look at this word regenerative from John Fullerton, who wrote this all those years ago, about the importance of bringing something new and bringing more vigorous life to, in this case, people and planet. And I think there are many different definitions of this. We won't labor too much on the academic side of things, but I think putting this into practice, we want to talk about some fantastic examples of how we see businesses coming back over the coming months, and then also potentials for growth beyond 2020. I think we all agree, and maybe we're not surprised by the fact that over 90% of Britons, and there are different nationalities that feel different about this, the lockdown at the moment, but a lot of people don't want to go back to normal. I think the jury is out still with regards to what is the new normal, as it's been often called now. So I think the conversations around creating that list are very pertinent in everyone's mind, from enjoying time at home to not having to commute, to wanting to see each other again physically and enjoy those moments of social cohesion. But businesses that will prosper after the pandemic are definitely going to take a more proactive approach. They're going to have to think ahead. They're going to have to start acting now as opposed to waiting. And I think being opportunistic, generally quite positive of what's going on, even though it is hard for other people to think what are the opportunities that lay within the foundations of what a global crisis like this has done to people's psyches and behaviors. And therefore the nature of enterprise and the nature of growth, which is being questioned at the moment, which sectors will come back strong and which sectors will have to start looking in a different way at what they do. And for example, city governance and city planning, and the Amsterdam government here taking a very proactive stance with regards to Kate Rawthorne's book, Donut Economics, and taking something from academia and publishing and actually putting it into practice while the balls are in the air. So while a city is in lockdown, using that moment to think about how they can almost leapfrog into a more environmentally friendly context and set up for their city. The Danish government, alongside the likes of the Dutch government, are also thinking about doing this. So there are four areas that personally I've seen talked about in many different ways, especially on social media and within business press. And these represent some comeback opportunities. So as we are moving from that moment of clearly the fast move from comfort to fear, in terms of that fear zone that a lot of people are living in now and working in, the beginnings of moving into the learning zone, whereby we're learning to lift our heads from the immediate reaction to what happened and what is happening daily, to starting to learn from it, and then thinking about how do we grow as individuals, and therefore if we are running a company or working with a network of people, how do we grow and how do we start to bring a new sense of vigor and life to what is going on. So the first area we're going to talk about is fast forward, and there's been some fantastic examples of how in this moment of crisis, now is the time to leverage disruption. Personally, as I'm sure many of you who have called in today have had those moments in workshops where you're doing horizon planning and you're looking at ideas that stick within a 1 to 2 year time frame, or a 3 to 5 year time frame, or a 10-year time frame. And often we're at the mercy of decision-making moments whereby we park a lot of interesting but potentially too experimental ideas and we put them in the further out horizons. But actually there are lots of examples because of the power of something like digital technology, whereby a lot of businesses are starting to bring forward ideas. So the first question, I guess, that we're asking of businesses is, are there any far out minimum viable products that you have had on your shelf for a while that can actually be fast forwarded now, given the nature of how the new norm is beginning to be discussed? And we like this example by WeWork, where their spaces are not as busy as they were. So they, with WeWork for Good, which was an initiative that they created before COVID-19 happened, but it's now giving over office space to eligible organizations playing an active role in supporting the public health response. And this is, slight philanthropy, but it makes a lot of business sense. They're in the business of office environments, so why not pass over that baton and give the space and the tools and the assets they have to those who really need it at the moment? And also emphasizing that WeWork Labs, which is one of their proprietary networks, to actually say, well, why don't we celebrate the startups and bring those startups together globally, i.e. individuals and practices that are trying to fight C19. And at the same time, for all those people that do have memberships with WeWork that are stuck at home and not allowed to come to their WeWork facilities, how do we create content? And there's been a wave of inspiration and services for people sitting in their bedrooms or in their offices or in their gardens, trying to have a normal work day. So that idea of fast forwarding things that were probably already in existence, but hadn't been put into full business practice just yet. So ask yourself this question: are there things that you were thinking, yes, we would go in to do this, but actually bring them forward and have a go at doing them now? The second big area was, which relates to that, is the importance of agility. And many business models have been fundamentally debased and threatened because of COVID-19. And I think we all know what those industries are. For example, retail, as in high street retail, tourism, air travel, etc. Many businesses that all of a sudden have had a complete halt to their pipeline. And revenue. And as a result of that, businesses have to understand quickly what is the new economy, what are the growth opportunities, and then quickly develop products, services, and markets and new business models. So the question is, what products and services and assets can redirect your revenue model for the better and for the long term? And the reason why for the long term is important here is that an example like Lululemon. So Lululemon had a very big digital community anyway, but as a result of closing all their stores, and if any of you are customers of Lululemon, you will know that their staff are called educators. They're very, very professional, and they understand the product, and they understand, because they're yoga practitioners, what to do with the product. Those people aren't working in the stores, but they are working from home, those who haven't been furloughed. So as a result of that, you have yoga practitioners and a global network now who are now leveraging their insight and their expertise to an audience that wants to stick with the brand. So this is sort of e-commerce mixed with entertainment and mixed with practice. And as a result of that, the businesses realized that the revenue model that is now their digital sweat life platform could outgrow, and quickly is outgrowing, the revenue from their physical stores. And they're going to stick with it. So as a result, come September, I can imagine that Lululemon and many other brands that have had this experience of pivoting their sort of revenue model have realized that maybe we should stick with it because it's a viable thing that we should do. It makes money, and it's not just for communicating. And I think the idea of digitalness becomes interesting there. As a result of that, I think a lot of businesses have come out and talked. Some businesses are still playing the dark game, whereby they don't want to talk about what's going on, or they're not quite sure what to say. But we are now faced with a low touch economy. And the idea of sort of low touch implies a lack of connection, or a lack of humanness, or a lack of socialization. And if anything, I think we all agree, probably personally more than professionally, we've actually had a lot more FaceTime with people than we've had before. And as a result of that, we see many leaders doing different things, but the successful leaders, for example, Bill Gates here, are demonstrating empathy, using their EQ, and really dialing into a local and a sort of a sense of belonging and connection. So how can you ensure that you talk and act in a way that is appealing to people's emotional needs? And I think, there was a lot of press about this last week in Fast Company, the differences between Elon Musk and Bill Gates as leaders, who are both, sort of tech entrepreneurs and tech giants, but one was very almost dismissive of the coronavirus, i.e. Elon Musk, and the other wasn't. And I think that therefore leverages a human connection. So audiences are now leaning in, wanting to hear more from the likes of Bill Gates. So whether you are a leader or not, I think, what could this mean to you and your business if you are looking to try and communicate and talk about what's going on? Yes, thinking about revenue, I'm sure, in the future, and keeping customers close, but using a more humanistic approach. And then when it comes to this sort of phrase, the new normal, I think, we have to be very careful about what we think that is. There are clearly some things from the past, pre-COVID, that are now coming back, and we are celebrating those things that maybe had been forgotten. There is lots of things that are clearly that have stopped, for example, air travel and other things that are having a positive effect, for example, on the climate. We can hear the animals in our cities again. So there are some things that we are noticing and we're wondering, is that the new normal? There are some things clearly that we miss though, that we want to bring back, that we're not doing. And I think this is going to be an interesting balancing act of celebrating the things that actually are making people happy at the moment, tapping into those, but also fundamentally looking at what is making the planet happy. Because very quickly we see that in China, emissions are increasing and footfall on high streets are increasing. And does that mean just not necessarily a reset, but a return to what was before, which wasn't sustainable for many different reasons? So how can you sustain new and improved behaviors and mindsets post-pandemic? And sustainability, I think, being a very important word here. What do we want to go ahead with and what do we want to keep? And if there is something new that is happening, more progressive behavior, for example, IKEA here, this is an IKEA concept whereby a lot of their store environments, which have a big part of their footprint, are now being very much tackled and fast-tracked. So the idea of becoming even more sustainable, much, much quicker than they had planned. And also they had concepts, for example, drive-through store concepts that they want to now fast-track as well. So this is about responsibility. This is about brands and businesses saying it's our job to actually save humans from themselves. And in some ways, well, let's make sure that we don't return to some of the more degenerative behaviors that were clearly still happening up until the end of last year. So given those comeback opportunities, and all of those things should be crossing the boardroom tables at the moment, at least in the next couple of weeks, with regards to how to change direction or how to challenge those questions, and the answers aren't easy. So we encourage a conversation about that. What does it mean beyond 2020? And I think now's the opportunity, when the balls are up in the air, as we said before, is to move beyond resilience and sustainability. They feel quite static entities or static energies, to think about new and improved directions. How do we take a different direction with our business so that we can rebound and do more and more with the world that's around us? And I think the psychology of consumers is there, that they want to see something new and interesting. They want to know that the 6-month pause that we have had, or we're going to have, I'm sure, feels like it was that it wasn't worth it, but it feels like businesses have done something with that time. It wasn't just about making money for them or thinking about let's wait and make money later. So there's definitely a generation that by the end of this crisis over the coming years will have matured and become adults, Generation Alpha. And this is a generation who are under the age of 25, which is Gen Z. So this is a Generation Alpha that has often been talked about in terms of this sort of less talk, more action attitude. And we currently have the largest youth population in the world in history, and they are going to emerge from this as a formative experience. They're going to have something that has really, I guess, shaped their psyche. A lot of them aren't going to have the chance to go to a lot of the vocations they wanted to, or the university experiences they wanted to. So they're going to start taking things onto themselves and forming their own agendas, and very much thinking about holistic human betterment. So what do you do with this new movement, or this generation? And a great example of the Department of Education that's created an alternative to higher education called T levels. And those of you who know a thing about T-shaped people, you have a core skill and then you have ancillary skills, but that core skill is about listening to who you really are, and that honesty about who you really are and what you really stand for. And the advertising here is a very, very different kind of experience. So how do we lean into this generation and give them the ammunition and the abilities and the platforms to come out of this and propel it into the 2020s? But I think it's fair to say this goes for all generations. I think a lot of people have refound, not necessarily their youth, but they've refound a sense of entrepreneurialism and a sense of creativity, and especially innovation when it comes to the time that we've had at home. A lot of conversations around real growth. I've just finished Joseph Stiglitz's book again on Measure What Counts in terms of beyond GDP. And I encourage you to read that book, because I think it's a good time to ask the question again, which is, GDP might go down and it might return, but it's not really the best measure. It was never invented to be a measure of well-being. So how do we start to think about a different way of looking at metrics of success? How as businesses and professionals do we create a more of a broader dashboard, a broader graphic equalizer of things that are about social, economic and environmental progress? And are you ready to set a new direction that focuses on these three things? Mainly because this great pause is going to, I think, create a sort of urge among humans and especially consumers to say, well, I want to see something different happen now. A lot of systems are broken globally. The health system isn't working as much as it could have done. And we need to think more integrated in that respect. And Apple here, who a couple of years ago came up with a concept and launched this, which was their first town square concept in Milan, which clearly hasn't been used as much as they wanted to. But sustaining this kind of understanding that they know that the chap here sitting on a bench is where the commerce is happening, but they're willing to invest in an experience that uplifts the human condition. And I think this is the kind of more elegant and more expansive lateral thinking that we now want to see from businesses, that it's not all about money, it's also about other things. Thinking systemically has become a very interesting buzzword of late as people increasingly choose brands that align with their values and stand for something bigger. More businesses will switch from selling meaningful, positive lifestyles. For example, one of many concepts here, this is Toyota's Woven City near Mount Fuji, whereby the beginnings of an integrated system run by a business. So increasingly we want our city environments, for example, to be a lot more governed and a lot more understood, so that our presence, and as some of you I'm sure have read a lot about the changing nature of privacy and surveillance in light of COVID-19, and how more of us are starting to say, I'd like to actually be understood a lot more so that my conditions and my lifestyles are understood by the businesses or the health professionals around me. And how can you regenerate society, therefore? How can you take a bigger stance that is more systemic so that you can elevate the things that will really matter to humans in the 2020s? And what comes after that is revenue. But the beginning starting point of all of this is being a savior of society systems as opposed to just a shop or just a business. And then in terms of transformation, a word that has been used in the last couple of years, a lot of businesses have called, the next decade the transformational moment, whereby we want businesses in particular to take a stance and to take us forward. We trust them. We definitely spend a lot of time with them compared to maybe governments or even our own families. So what does it mean to be a brand that is using, as Joseph Pine would talk about, transformation economy? Which is beyond the experience economy, and how we want to go through a journey of transformation. We want to feel like at the end of that experience with a brand or that journey that I'm bettered. So how can you protect consumers from consumerism, to be and do better for themselves, others, and the planet? And a great example here from Nike that was launched last July, which is related to their Nike Direct department side of their business, whereby it's the kind of D2C evolution of D2C here, whereby a vertically integrated system here. So you subscribe to Nike. This is currently aimed at teenagers. You subscribe to Nike every 30, 60, 90 days, you get a fresh pair of trainers. Obviously you grow with the brand, they grow with you, not just in shoe size, but in lifestyle. And then they collect the product, vertically integrate and create a circular system. And interestingly, the price mechanism is that it incentivizes you to be a more sustainable consumer, i.e. it's cheaper if you use your product for longer, more than twice. So this is an interesting learning mechanism where brands are becoming educators and mentors and coaches for a better type of consumerism. And at the end of it is a transformed human. And all of this sounds great. I think there's a lot of examples of very well executed things here, but one thing that I think we've all noticed when we see the rapid response to COVID-19 has been the fact that imperfection is okay. Getting something 60, 70, 80% ready and just out to market, and using a crowd to help execute and refine over the course of weeks or days has become an interesting, norm now. Those of you in the innovation world have had a lot of experience on fail fast and prototyping and piloting. And this becomes, I feel like this is becoming very accepted now for big brands to just make a move, no matter how big or small it is, as opposed to being apathetic and stay out because it's not ready yet. Clearly there's a balancing act there, and we need to mitigate risk with regards to making product that doesn't work, but there is a chance for brands to make a difference and actually start to lean into this situation and reflect somehow some sort of movement as opposed to staying out. So those are 4 2020 sort of comeback opportunities that differ in intensity and, as I said, by geography and industry, and then and also particular ones with regards to how we start to build a pathway forward into 2020 and beyond. So by no means lots of answers, but by definitely lots of questions that we would like to pose to the world. And we encourage dialogue to try and solve these questions.
That's fantastic, Tom. Thank you. Thanks for making sense and putting such a sort of clear and lucid spotlight on things that are so complex. And many things that, many kind of observations that you're making are in their sort of early stages, infancy. I said right at the beginning that the last 6 weeks at moments have felt like an eternity, and yet it's only 6 weeks. And yet here we are looking at the kind of, the return to the new normal and a comeback where all the things that over a year or two with a client you might discuss from, writing down words like, remodeling a business with purpose and responsibility, or looking at transformation strategies, or looking at innovation, looking at systems to change society. Suddenly we're looking at all of it. And I guess one of the big messages is just this need to act and to try things and to do things and be prepared to do things with genuine belief and purpose, and not be afraid to take risks and take more risks. I think the entrepreneurial mindset that you're describing, that we're all sort of suddenly discovering whether we want to or not, is going to be a very powerful thing for all of us. And as you described, the Generation Alpha role in society and shaping the future of society is going to be critical, I guess, for all of us, for all our businesses, for all our kind of personal kind of positions in society, as well as for brands and companies. So yes. Thank you very much for that.
Pleasure.
That was a lot of information in 25 minutes, and I'm hoping there might be some questions. We do have a chat function. If anybody wants to either, I'm not sure if you can unmute yourself and shout out, or you can put it on in writing. But if anyone has questions, we would welcome them. I do have one actually, which was just about this kind of, COVID-19 is obviously not going away until there are all the things that everyone is working around the clock to discover, like vaccinations and a cure for it. And yet it's had some, tangential and positive impacts on society. You talk about the return to, the sort of environment being a better place, and nature growing, and birds singing, and all the things that are sort of happening by virtue of humans being indoors, and as you said, sort of being protected from themselves to some degree. How does that the return to work in some cases could be quite a frightening idea, because we'll come back to doing some of the things that we were doing before, which are not all virtuous and great. And given that yesterday was the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, where do you sort of see the role of tackling something even bigger than what the world is currently suffering through COVID-19, which is a climate crisis? Where does that fit within the priority set for brands?
Yeah, it's interesting, because the intent of when I started Avansere only in January the 1st this year was to try and focus on that. It was to focus on how do you move businesses forward through this terrain to deliver money, but also social, environmental needs, or at least tackle those needs. And clearly that's been fast tracked. But the environment, but I'm very nervous to talk about the climate in the same context of a lot of the situations that people are faced with, because I had a call yesterday with a Italian architect who designs head offices, and he was saying how his briefs are, they've moved from being I want my office redesigned, to I need to have a platform created to handle the future of work, because people might not come back in the same way. And I think a lot of just to focus on one of your points on the reality of people coming back versus the comeback for businesses. I think it's best that one isn't a hypocrite and knows that we want to go to the pub pretty soon afterwards, and we want to go and see some humans again, and people that we've been seeing digitally for 6 months. There's going to be an embrace, and that embrace is going to bring with it a lot of the treating, and a lot of the celebrating, a lot of the humanness that we crave at the moment, or at least we're lacking. And then there's a footprint that comes with that. From making that commuter journey every day, or getting on a plane twice a week, like I'm sure you do as well, Raoul, where you're going to those meetings because people want to see you physically, but you incur the emission cost as you go along. So we have to think realistically about, as a spreadsheet or as a profit and loss, what are some of the things that are just going to be taken off of the balance sheet because we're just not going to do them anymore, versus some things have to return. And I think this is where the point I made around beyond GDP is creating this bigger dashboard of metrics, so that we know really how it all looks at the end of the day. And I think it's fair to say that we can all see the results, whether it's Los Angeles or China or Japan, or we can see the emissions are going down. We can see the sky more. There's not a sound going above our heads every day. We know that we feel a little bit more climate friendly, but very quickly that could be switched back to 2019 results. In some ways, the World Earth Day was a great birthday party to celebrate, because look how wonderful the Earth is looking right now. So
yeah, we did a great job of that.
50.
For those that didn't even know it was happening, they all contributed to a fantastic, probably the most unpolluted and cleanest, greenest Earth Day out of all 50. So we all deserve a little pat on the back for contributing something, even if we weren't aware of it. There are a couple of questions. So Jose, thank you for your question, and thank you for thanking us. What's your opinion? This is Jose's question. What is your opinion regarding the future of wholesale fashion agencies? Do you think that direct consumer, do we think direct to consumer will be predominant?
Yes, and this is a question I've had with a couple of food businesses as well. So I think where you had the intermediary businesses that were clearly either wholesaling or distributing, I think the consumer has very, very quickly realized that the connection with a head office of a company, whether it's a fashion apparel business or a wine company or a meat company, or they've definitely questioned the logistics and the capabilities of wholesale, but also general distribution chains. They've wanted to have the product, they understand so they can get product that they want, but I think they've realized that having the multiple stages to getting a product from a business, I don't necessarily think all people have realized this, but there's been a small realization that if I go to the source, I might get something cheaper, but I might also get something that's a bit more on my terms. And I think one of the results of that is that the intermediaries have to start realizing that they are in the business of service. Because a lot of the businesses that have done D2C in the last couple of weeks and said, we'll handle this because we can't afford to have someone in the pipeline or the value chain and pay for their business as well. They've realized that the people that are back of house or head office have had to start to develop a service mentality to actually interact with customer orders and deal with the consumer. And I think a lot of them have enjoyed that. That was obviously handed over for many years to the wholesale or the distribution businesses that would handle that servicing through staff, etc., and customer engagement. So I think for a wholesale business, it's about saying what really is your role moving forward. Is it to be an accentuation of the brand, to really demonstrate the service experience, to tell more stories, to have a more human experience? Or is it just about selling product and shifting product? And I think the example of Nike, for example, with their D2C demonstration is that, will they start to say, you know what, we don't need JD Sports. We don't need to have those intermediaries, because our D2C models just tripled or quadrupled or times 10 in the last 9 months, because we now have a direct relationship and a database that we own. So I think there are a lot of businesses that were in business up until now. They've clearly stopped because they don't have a role at the moment, or at least they're finding it difficult. And I'd encourage a question to say, what do you think your role should be? And a very open, systemic conversation with everyone in the value chain to understand what each player is actually meant to be doing, as humans continue to crave interaction.
I think just one final point on that question, actually, around direct to consumer and the sort of role of wholesale as well, and particularly in fashion, is I think that it's interesting for us. You know, we've worked with fashion brands for over 25 years as one area of our business expertise. And when I think about what we've learned about some of the brands that we work with who have been less digitally set, or less sort of spread across all their various options of how they sell and reach their consumer, I think now is definitely one of those big lessons in looking at how to sort of flatten the curve as a business, where you have a multitude of ways to reach your consumer, direct, wholesale, and many other things in between. And I guess, you know, we've all become incredibly, or certainly more adept at using screens and digital and social media for our sort of multitude of things we need in terms of information, contact, connection. That's not going to go away. And hopefully, you know, everybody is now learning to find new ways to connect in a non-personal way. And that has to be a sort of key indicator of how we do business perhaps in the future as well. Not solely that way, but that's one additional way. There was a question about the book you mentioned. Can you just repeat the name and author of the book that you referenced, Tom?
There was two. The first one was Kate Raworth, which was the Donut Economics, University of Cambridge. So Donut Economics, Kate Raworth, or Raworth. And then the second one was Measure What Counts. And that was written by three people, but the author that most recognized was Joseph Stiglitz. So Stiglitz. Yeah.
Great. And then there was another question which was really about how one balances, you know, sustainability and sort of social need for society versus the need for businesses to thrive commercially, from Matt. So, you know, brands need to decide on strategies that allow them to focus on sort of personal needs and obviously a sort of stay-at-home mindset, and yet in a broader and you know, broader need for being a good sort of citizen and good value add to society. But we still need to do business. You know, we still need to thrive commercially. We still need to sell things, pay rent, employ people, and all the things that the economy is currently hugely struggling to adapt to whilst there is no business. You know, how do brands approach that? Huge question.
Yeah, there's a study done in the last couple of years, which is a bit of a hypothetical study by a company called Project X Global, whereby they're looking at the 10 sectors that are causing the big heavy emission problems. Food and drink manufacturing, for example, being number one. And then you can imagine the textiles, the construction, the list goes on. And in a sort of utopian situation whereby we would like to all be climate friendly and eradicate the bad things that are causing things systemically, you'd have a pecking order straight away, which isn't good because a lot of people run companies in those areas. The question now is, given the fact that we've had a moment to raise our heads because of the isolation and think and see what's happening, it's that balancing act, as I said before, between back to business and then back to the future. And how do we go? We have seen direct results from less industry performing, but obviously economically that's had a dangerous, you know, situation that's come with it. So I don't have an answer, but I think it's trying to map out systemically what can move forward and what should we retain and continue working on in terms of industries, and what things do we just have to hold our hands up and say, well, they weren't exactly helping the climate sustainability problem all along. Is this actually a moment to sort of rethink those businesses, the value of them? And clearly that's going to have an economic impact on some parts of the big equation that is GDP. But as I said before, in that book Joseph Stiglitz wrote with Martin Duran from OECD, is it doesn't add up, unfortunately. The sustainability dimensions don't add up, and maybe now's the time to rethink some of those equations. You're on mute, Raoul.
Sorry,
There we
I've
go.
got a question from Brewdog, which is, other than failing to adapt, are there any major pitfalls for brands and businesses that one could fall into, which could negatively affect the chance of survival? Because adaptation, in its broader sense, is clearly a very key sort of name of the game.
Yes.
What else?
I think this is maybe idealistic, and this is the way that my mind thinks. But those of you who know me, the point I made around in 6 months' time, when we are hopefully going back to our high streets or to our F&B establishments or our holidays or whatever it might be, are consumers, a bit like a long distance relationship, are consumers going to come back saying, I was kind of expecting you to have painted the room? I was, you know, I was thinking you might have got ready for the grand re-arrival. And as a metaphor, I think now is the time to, if you have the liquidity, to go to work on how do we upgrade what was before. And that is a very idealistic answer. So a lot of business can't afford that, and they can't afford to wait to sort of see if they can increase their liquidity again. And a lot of the examples that we talked about today, they have a bank account that can afford that. So it's a real tough balance between going through the process of fear, learning and growing, the psychology of that, but at the same time being realistic about what is it really going to take to keep the doors open, or at least keep the lights on, even if no one's in there. The one pitfall I would say is try to use the opportunity, if possible, to broaden your mind about the business models. Reread those business model books that encourage you to be disruptive and embrace disruption, and just think laterally about using digital a lot more. And I think one sector that is going to really do very well is the restaurant industry, that is going to realize that seat covers or covers in a restaurant every night was not their only metric of success now, that they can actually create revenue outside of when the lights go off, they can continue to make revenue. And I think there are some industries, for example, the airport industry, that is also going to realize that they are a venue, not just when you're about to get on a plane. So I think there's that ability to think laterally. And I think, Raoul, I think we both encourage maybe a bit of a coalition, people come together and different sectors talk about the challenges and what can digital do for them, just as one exam question, to see what that produces.
Okay, I've got a question from Mark Blenkinsop from Hackett and Pepe Jeans. Hello, Mark. Which is really, he said, the shock to the system of COVID-19 is immeasurable. And of course, we didn't see it coming. We didn't know it was coming. And if we knew it was coming, perhaps there was more one could have businesses, society, governments, countries, etc., could have done to prepare and adjust. But there was no warning signal, none really. I mean, unless you really were listening to Bill Gates, which clearly lots of people chose to ignore, but much to our cost. But since we're sort of looking at remapping, and particularly remapping in the short term, and there's the seriousness of talking about survival, and then we talked about survival strategies and revival and thriving in the future. I guess when we do try and cast ourselves beyond the short term, this is Mark's question, he'd love to hear what we think the high street will look like in 2021, 2022. Great question, and if only we knew the answer, but I'm going to let you have a go, Tom.
It's funny you say that. So the last 12 months, a couple of placemaking projects with the landlords of London, and also some landlords internationally. In those workshops where you're looking at the horizon 1, 2, and 3 ideas, and ranking them according to feasibility, desirability, et cetera, and commerciality, I guess. And the ones that were seen as, well, let's do that in 2025, that seems a bit out there. Those ones were often deemed less relevant and less about survival, because they didn't create a direct revenue stream or direct revenue stream in a physical environment that is a shop. So if I am a supermarket, or I'm a restaurant, or I'm a department store, or a standalone store on, say, Regent Street, knowing that the store manager, his KPIs were not connected to the head of e-commerce, and they had different metrics to perform. And yet all of the scenarios that myself and other colleagues from at the Future Laboratory, when I was there, were talking about was definitely, why aren't you an end-to-end complete value chain whereby whoever makes the money, all adds up, all ships rise? I think it takes the pressure off the storekeepers to be entertainment managers, because increasingly we are going to, whether it's the likes of a King's Cross, Cold Drops Yard, or we're going to the high street, we're going to these places because we want to socialize, we want to see stuff, we want to be entertained, we want our kids to play in water, whatever it might be, and we might buy some stuff. But the landlord and tenant equation was based on, you're not making enough money and there's not enough footfall. And I think that is going to be, and I'm glad it's going to be, a metric or a performance target that is hopefully removed from the likes of a small brand trying to prove that they should be allowed to stay in somewhere like King's Cross for the duration, even if they can't equal the numbers, because the rent will go up and up and up. And I think for small businesses in particular, this is critical that landlords change, I guess, their attitude to what is growth. That if you get people coming and belonging there and connecting there, not necessarily spending, they'll do the spending on this. That's disappeared. They'll do the spending on my phone, on the phone, because the whole impact of going somewhere physically has made a difference.
What's interesting is, there is, again, so much being discussed in such a condensed amount of time over the last 6 weeks. But I think this idea of the future of the high street and community and connectivity becoming much more than just a sort of thing that you do a little bit of. You connect and you build a community and you look after your community and you hope that they buy more of your stuff. The fundamental foundations of what a future society might look like will be built, I think, on how we genuinely allow cities to be friendly towards building connections and community, particularly after this experience. That's certainly my view. There's a question from Neil Denning about the future of the agency and whether the agency relationship with clients needs to evolve. Neil, I'd say I'm going to take that question on and just say 100% yes. And I think it would be completely nuts to try and hold on to the agency of old and try and kind of build it for September. I think the amount we're learning and the amount of things we're learning that are actually incredibly enlightening has already kind of set us off in a direction that is about a completely new model for an agency and its relationship with clients, and its role and purpose and usefulness, which will be built again around relationships and our partnerships with our clients. Will be more useful in a partnership and less useful in a transactional relationship. So thanks for that question. I've got another one here, which is from Justine Portery. Do you think behaviors are likely to change for good and lean towards less consumption? The rebalance may be triggered by consumers / citizens rather than companies taking the lead on rethinking their business model. Great question.
Can you repeat the second half of it again? Sorry.
So do you think behaviors are likely to change for good and lean towards less consumption? The rebalance may be triggered by consumers rather than companies taking the lead on rethinking their business model.
I've said this for a long time. I think consumerism is a power that needs to be tapped into. We're talking about 7 billion people that want to now get up in the morning and dispose of their income if they have it. And you have to look at the emerging markets as one of the biggest levers, one of the biggest drivers of that. The newfound wealth, whether it's €10 a day or €1,000 a minute. They want to spend it and want to self-actualize at some point. So we have to take a very undeveloping mixed with developed attitude with regards to what is consumerism. And it's not going to be a tsunami that will stop. But we need to use it, and we need to mobilize change through those humans that want to go back to treating and enjoying and disposing. And I'm the first one to say I can't wait to go to the pub again. So it's important that we don't ignore that humans have a certain innate spirit that is 21st century. Yes, I think consumers might change. We certainly saw movements beginning last year with the likes of kind of the Gretanomics of this world, whereby there's millions of people that want change, but it felt like it was done in a vacuum, if I'm being really honest. I haven't seen a same balancing act with regards to people are spending probably, I personally feel like a lot of my friends are spending a lot more at home on things like I need to get food and I'm overbuying maybe in terms of flour. There's that happening versus the sustainability equation that was let's consume less. So I actually think there's going to be, I don't think a consumer driven initiative as much as maybe we would hope. I think the last point we made in the comeback strategy about new norms in the deck was that I think businesses are going to have to take the responsibility and say our model nurtures better consumerism. It saves humans from themselves. And that doesn't mean you're not allowed on a plane or you're not allowed into our store. It just means we need to somehow educate consumers and remind them of some of the good things that have come out of this, which is probably not many, but most people right now are still in fear zone. But we need to learn from what have we been doing that is actually much better for the climate in just one slice of the new normal equation. But I encourage us all to crowdsource what is the new normal and create a universal dashboard of like, let's get rid of this stuff, let's stick with this stuff, and let's start this stuff. A classic start, stop, continue exercise. So I think businesses are going to run it. Sorry to answer the question.
Yeah. Here's a question from Duncan McRobb, very appropriate as well, as he's about to take on the CEO of Exposure USA role. So his question is, in a world of corporate tax avoidance and failing societal care systems, brands have looked to win favor and profile through contributing to healthcare and pandemic support efforts. Do you believe this will become a new normal for corporations to fill the void of failing governmental finance?
Yeah. So a couple of years ago, the Future Laboratory published a macro trend called civic brands. And many examples at the time of businesses taking the responsibility to say, your government can't afford it, we will. And those examples spanned setting up institutions, as in bricks and mortar establishments, funding initiatives, educating consumers, doing adult learning, etc. And clearly, yes, we have seen a lot of brands take the opportunity, I think, to create brand equity, to say, we'll produce this much of this sanitizer or this much face masks, or we'll put this much money in. The challenge is that in terms of sustaining that behavior, I think a lot of businesses have done something because they have the facilities to help and probably won't carry on doing it because they're a certain type of company that doesn't make face visors, but they've done it to help. That helping, that sort of support mechanism, the behavior of acting civically to pay in and say, look, we can help afford this, I think will continue. Whether or not consumers will call it purpose washing or develop cynicism again, because right now they need it versus that's a bit too much of that branded visor, or too much of the branded NHS experience. I think that's going to be an interesting generational difference. I think anyone under 35 has grown up in a world whereby I kind of want a brand to have their name above the door. And thank God it's called the So-and-so Institute. Where I think a lot of generations have always been cynical about this. So I think it's going to be an interesting balancing act of, are you going to lose consumers and fans because you're overdoing the purposing, or are you going to actually win more? And I think every brand will have its own baggage to deal with and to work out its balancing act of how civic it should be. But I think it's fair to say, I think some governments universally are going to start to come together and have that conversation around the World Health Organization, and maybe rebrand that and say it is actually, the name is on the tin. It needs to deliver world health and organized world health. So maybe there's a bigger conversation there for governments to have.
Okay. We're out of time actually, but Jose has one more question, which was about the, again, related to fashion, which is about the digital showrooms and what's our opinion? You know, are we, the industry, ready to provide a good experience and service, given that we are now not working out of a physical space, sending samples out, hosting appointments, meeting journalists and stylists and buyers, etc. You know, where does digital play its part, and how does that look in the future?
Yeah, I think that's a very big question in 3 minutes. I think the
less than.
Yeah, I think, you know, the short response of that is have a look at Carling, a Norwegian fashion brand, high street kind of streetwear brand. They did it was just a campaign 2 years ago, and it was basically on the idea of, on your Instagram profile, you can buy digital clothing to make yourself look different to your friend just for that day or that second, but you're not physically buying any product. The stickability of that type of service now, which is essentially costume design. So today I should have worn, okay, a different color shirt. If this is actually our interaction now, then I'm just going to switch it. And I will pay $90 for that t-shirt to be able to do that. So I think the viability of virtual product, which has been happening in gaming for years, becoming a real thing now, because this is going to happen a lot more, I think is a very, very real expansion for businesses that are so used to, as you said, producing it in some part of the world and getting it shipped and distributed in a showroom physically. The kind of virtual fashion model needs to be fast forward. The great thing about that, just to end on that, is that the consumers create no footprint in doing that at all, apart from server emissions. So I think that there's also a win-win there.
Yeah, I guess in a way, fashion, like many other sectors, will still never be quite as potent and interesting without the physicality. And so when it comes to even buying a collection and feeling and seeing the product, nothing can really replace that. A bit like a dining experience and many other things that we will, over the next 3, 6, 8 weeks, we'll realize how much we miss. It's just how much we miss and how much we want versus how much we're prepared to live without. And what we realize is excessive, because there's plenty of excess that we are more aware of now than ever before. And it's about being, perhaps a bit more choiceful in what really matters. On that note, we're going to wrap up. We've had an amazing audience, a fantastic show of breadth of attendance, which is really, really appreciated. So thank you to everyone that's still here, and thanks for making the time for us. There is a whole series of other virtual events that we are putting on, and some will be towards the end of the day, hence the good morning, good afternoon, good evenings. The good evenings one might revolve around music and drinks and mixology. There are some lessons around 5 things we've all learned during the COVID-19 experience in the first 6 weeks, but more of that to come. Just want to say thank you, Tom, again. Always super thought-provoking and insightful. Really, really appreciate your time and what you've shared. I think this is, as I did say at the beginning, it's been recorded and available for anyone that wants to have a refresher or remind themselves of the books that we should all go out and buy. Again, have a great day, and I wish everybody, the best of health to all of you and your families. Thanks very much.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.